Dr. Simon, what's your experience with narcissistic personality disorder?
Hmm. When you first asked that question of me, I kind of took it personally as if, what do I know about being a narcissist? Um, which, of course, is an example of narcissism, which is why I did that, because I made the question about me as opposed to making the question about the question. Um, so let me just say that, first of all, I want to say this about narcissism and narcissistic personality. It is one of the trendy diagnoses in our field right now. And because it's a trendy diagnosis, it means that the term is overused and overapplied. And so I think it's important that all of you that are watching and listening to this keep that in mind when you hear it tossed about or when you toss it about, because chances are these days it's being used too much in any event. Let me first talk about what a personality disorder is. And then we can talk about this specific type of personality disorder. So every human being has a personality, a style, a way of approaching the world. Some of us are very careful, cautious, organized, deliberate, linear. Everything finds its own cell in a spreadsheet. Okay. So we're more governed, if you will, by our thinking and our logic. That's a style. You might call that an obsessive style. Okay. Now, I don't mean it negatively, it's descriptive. Some of us react, instead of reacting with thinking and where we can file the information, some of us react in a more emotional style. So our personality style may be tending to first respond to situations or questions or anxiety with an emotional response or reaction. The technical term for that, I suppose, in our field is histrionic. Okay. Again, when you hear this word, you're obsessive, you're histrionic, they all sound like cudgels. They all sound like, something where you're batting on somebody. And I don't mean it that way, but those are the terms we've got. So we have each of us a style. And it's important that we have a style because each of us wants to be in this world in a somewhat consistent manner, right? Our styles are flexible. If your personality is a personality style versus a personality disorder, your style's flexible. So while you might approach novel situations or complex situations generally as a thinker versus a feeler, or say a feeler versus a thinker, if a situation requires, demands, or needs you to respond in a different manner, you can. So you've got a prevailing style. A personality disorder is an individual whose response style, experience style, processing style is fixed, rigid, and doesn't flex and bend with the demands of the situation. Okay? What's interesting about people with personality disorders is they don't see the disorder. To them, it's normal. It's what we call egosyntonic. It's consistent with how they see themselves. Other people find them to be difficult, annoying, problematic, but for them, it's just how I am. But the difference between having a personality style or a cognitive style, which we all do, and a disorder is the degree to which you're able to flex, adapt, bend, move to the demands of the situation or the person or the people that you're involved with. So, narcissism, of course, is a term that comes out of, if I'm not mistaken, Greek literature. Narcissus was the person who saw his reflection in a pond and fell in love with himself. Okay. So there is something called healthy narcissism. Okay. Think of it as self-esteem. Think of it as self-love. Think of it as I know what my strengths and gifts and talents are. Think of it as a healthy perception of who you are that makes you feel good about yourself. That's healthy narcissism. Okay. People with healthy narcissism are folks miles like you and me, where driven to accomplish and succeed, many of us. We look for opportunities to benefit other people's lives. We're reflective on our impact on other people and how they experience us, whether we're being beneficent, malevolent, and things like that. The narcissistic personality is an individual whose concern in the world, in their interactions with others, their relationships with others, personally, business, in a store, in a movie theater, is about what do I need and how do I get what I want. Okay? And so that mutual reciprocity of I have an impact on you, you have an impact on me, we have the ability to benefit one another. So I'm concerned with how what I'm doing impacts you as much as I'm concerned with how it impacts me. The narcissist, the pathological narcissist, the one with that personality disorder, is concerned with themselves. How does this reflect on me? How is this going to impact me? So let me give an example. Let's imagine that there is a bill in the state legislature to change the tax code so that people that make a higher income end up in a higher tax bracket. Okay. None of us want to pay more tax, but the narcissist sees that as only being about him or her. The healthy narcissist says, I don't want to pay more taxes, but I can afford it and other people will benefit. Okay. So the narcissist gets upset. They're trying to take my money. This harshes me. This isn't fair to me. I need more. In relationships, the narcissist is one of the most complicated and puzzling people to deal with because they're often charming, because they tune into other people's need states. They can detect them and they can move in on their need state in a way that makes that person feel special, makes that person feel heard and listened to. But the person with pathological narcissism isn't doing that to benefit that human being. They're doing it to benefit themselves. Okay. So let's bring it now to the world to your world and my world, Miles, which is divorce and conflicts between parents, and in my case, about their kids. First of all, the narcissistic person in that situation is not going to look at settlements or compromises that benefit the whole versus benefit the individual. They're not going to look at what seems to be fair or reasonable. They're not going to look at compromises that maybe they don't really like the compromise, but it cuts through a lot of conflict, cuts through a lot of pain and difficulty, and allows people to get to yes and move on. Okay. They're going to negotiate a deal that benefits them, and they're going to hang in there and try to negotiate a deal that benefits them no matter what. So they're very difficult to work with, right? As parents, I worry a lot about parents with pathological narcissism because fundamentally the narcissist has real struggles with, and in many cases lacks empathy for other people. What's empathy? Empathy is the ability to put yourselves in the shoes of another person and imagine what they feel. Okay? And by taking the perspective of empathy, I can appreciate what you feel. You're able to modulate, change, govern how you interact with them, how you might reach an agreement with them, because you can put yourself in their shoes and know how unhappy they may be, or how frightened they may be, or how angry they may be. You don't want to be a part of that. To me, as a child psychologist by DNA, one of the most important skills for a parent is empathy. Okay. What is this like for my child? How does this impact my child? If I do this, how might it impact my son or daughter? If I don't do this, how might it impact my son or daughter? The empathic parent is the parent whose child can be much more child-centered because they can take the child's perspective, even though it's childlike, maybe childish and not mature. Okay. The narcissistic parent has difficulty with empathy. They have difficulty putting themselves they have difficulty taking the perspective of another human being, including their own child. Okay. And instead of them seeing their job as fundamentally denying themselves over and over and over again things they may want in order to benefit a child. I mean, simple things like not buying themselves a new pair of shoes because the kid needs shoes. Okay. Or going to the restaurant the kid wants to go to that they can't stand because the kid really likes it. And, it's time for the kid to have that. The narcissistic parent focuses on themselves, and in the process, the child is diminished. So we worry, in my field of child custody disputes, we worry a lot about parents with unhealthy narcissism because of the negative impact on children. Now, I've gone far afield from your simple question, and I'm going to let you jump in and refocus me.
No, great answer, because you anticipated where I was going, which was accurate. My follow-up question now is, let's take a very specific, very typical parenting problem that every family lawyer has faced from minute one. And that is getting a parent, usually an opposing parent, either punishing them or cajoling them or otherwise informing them about two things that are negative to the child. Number one, discussing the litigation.
Mm-hmm.
And two, passive aggressive negative comments about the other parent, their competence, their attractiveness, their this, their that. So I'm going to let you go in the context of what you've just said, knowing that the common usage of the term narcissism is different from the clinical definition. How do you work this problem, and what advice do you have for family lawyers who find themselves in this position where, regardless of the reason, we have very basic, simple problems with the co-parenting arrangement around the time of separation?
Sure. Let me start by making a broad observation. I commented earlier about each of us have a personality style. And I think I did a reasonably good job of differentiating between a personality style and a personality disorder, right? So you and I go to ABA conferences, local bar conferences, and so forth, and we hear our friends and colleagues talk about how much they see personality disorder in their practice. So everybody that walks through their door, or all of the opposing parties, have a personality disorder. So here's what I want you to know. I want everybody listening to know, when we are under stress, all of us, me too, when we're under stress, we tend to become less flexible, less adapted, more rigid, and more fixed in our perceptions and our reactions and how we process. The kinds of pressures and stresses that are on parents who are divorcing and litigating the well-being of their children cannot be described in English. I don't know how to describe how difficult it is, what it feels like, the interior hellscape for these men and women. Under that kind of stress, it's normal for a person to regress, to become more fixed and rigid in their style. And if their style tends to be narcissistic, and by the way, many really successful people have narcissistic styles because you've got to be very self-oriented to be a huge success, right? A lot involved in that. They fall back on it and they begin to look like people with a personality disorder. when in fact and we don't know necessarily, but they may be people just under a lot of stress that are temporarily regressing in their personality style. Okay, what do we do about it? Thing number one, most important thing of all, don't label it, describe it. Okay? Labels, and I've been using labels today: narcissism, histrionic, obsessive compulsive. Those are labels. And remember, in using those labels, I apologize for their use because they sound so heavy-handed. Yeah, they do. When I talked about the person who's really organized, linear, likes things predictable, that didn't sound so damn judgmental, did it? I was describing what I saw as opposed to labeling what I saw. So the first thing, don't label your client and don't label the opposing client. And let me tell you why. Two reasons, at least two reasons. One is the people become objects and you become less capable and supple and adaptable in dealing with their needs and what they need to throw out at you. Two, the other reason that you don't want to label them is because when we label people, we create in our mind a stereotype. It becomes a caricature of a human being. And even our most difficult clients, even the clients that really are hard for us, cause us to lose sleep. The clients we wonder, should we be representing them or should I be their consultant or whatever? They're still people. They're still human beings. They still have needs for which there's compassion and ability to be compassionate. So the first thing is don't label them. If you're trying to get your client who's behaving in a difficult way, if you're trying to get your client to modify their behavior, if you tell them you're a this or you're a that, they will feel pointed at. They will feel misunderstood. They will feel judged. If you say to them, I notice when you're stressed, you tend to fill in the blank. You've just made an empathic connection with them. You've noticed that they're stressed. You've noticed their behavior, but you haven't judged their behavior. You've just noticed it. And then you're able to say, when you behave like that, I worry, or I notice that the following things are more likely to happen. And then you talk about some of the unfortunate things that may happen, or the way in which they may make other people that they want to feel supported by, and may push them away. So you're using your empathicness to describe to them what they're doing in a way that allows them to see it without feeling judged by it. Okay, so that's tool number one, don't label. So how many times have we both seen lawyers get on the phone with their opposing counsel and say, your client's a narcissist, and then, we're just off to the races, right? Now we're mirroring for our clients the very conflict process that they have. And we're then for embedding that in making their lives more difficult. So that's thing number one. When you're trying to point out to your client what it is that you see them doing or not doing that creates problems for them, you want to describe to them how what they're doing makes them unhappy, fails to, where their needs aren't being met, where their goals are harder to accomplish. In other words, rather than pointing out what they're doing that pisses off other people, you want to align with them by aligning with the part of them that would like a different outcome and isn't able to obtain that outcome. When you form that kind of a bond and they get that you understand them and that you're on their team in that way, then you can start talking to them about how they make other people feel too, because they believe that you get them. So it's a complex dialogue because it takes time and we're all busy. And sometimes if a person's unpleasant, we want to get them off the phone or out of our office, but we've got to take time, slow ourselves down, and use our empathic skills to put ourselves in their shoes, imagine being them, what would they feel and what would they like to hear? Okay. Now, that doesn't mean we're not patronizing them. We're not telling them what they want to hear because they want to hear it. We're telling them things that they need to hear in a way that they can take it in.
Right. And one of the, I hate to say tricks, but when I work with my clients, I try to explain something called unwritten custody rules, including but not limited to don't discuss the litigation and don't talk negatively about the other parent. And I'm going to talk to a follow up. For all you know, you're being recorded.
Yeah.
There's a lot of recording out there. And so to a large extent, even when I have the person I'm concerned may be the bad actor, I try to couch it in terms, like you said, of this is how we win. Okay, this is how we go forward. That being said, is there an aspect of narcissism in particular that you think many family lawyers get absolutely wrong and or are counterintuitive to their own object or counterproductive to their own objectives?
Well, inside of the narcissist we tend to think of there being an essential central fear that they live with. And the fear is not getting what they need. Okay. They're afraid they're not going to get what they need. They're afraid they're going to get left out. They're afraid they're going to be unloved. So the narcissist, although they may be very bombastic and feel really they may come off as very powerful, very imposing, is actually a terrified human being. The narcissism is the side of their personality that portrays, bluster and power. And what's the flip side? Fear, powerlessness, lack of efficacy. Okay. So your question was, what do we miss about them? That's what we miss about them. We resonate to what they're putting out on the surface, and we don't see past it to what's mobilizing and motivating that attitude and behavior in them. Okay. Right. So we want to try to see through their humanity, which can be really, really difficult, because when a person is truly behaving as a pathological narcissist, their goal of their behavior is to dominate you, control you, disempower you, make you dependent on them almost in a way, which if you're a healthy or relatively healthy human being makes you feel terrible, then you lash out and you fight back. Okay. So it's hard to do this, but that's one of the tricks and the tools. You asked about two of the mistakes that parents make, which is, degrading or disparaging the other parent and talking about the litigation and how to avoid it. And look, it's really common. I think it happens in most complicated, emotionally difficult custody disputes between parents, where they will say something unkind about the child's other parent to the child, or where they will say something like, well, I'm taking your mom to court and we'll see to that. Okay. So is it a good thing to do? No. Is it a typical thing to do? Yeah. Okay. So how do we help the parents not do that? Well, from my perspective, the best way to do it is not to explain to them what the consequences to them will be. If you do that, the judge will get mad at you. If you do that, you could not get what you want in your child sharing plan, because it may show that you're not an attuned parent. The best way to do it, again, is to do it from the eyes of the child. Okay? Because we want to presume and assume, unless we know otherwise, that at the end of the day, that parent will push their kid off the train track and let the train hit them instead. That's the kind of love they have for their kid. So if they can see what they're doing through the eyes of that child and their love for that child, it's much easier for them to decide that even though this itches and I really want to scratch it, I won't scratch it today. Okay. Because it will harm my kid. Okay. I tell parents two things, and sometimes they help, sometimes they don't. And how they're said and the timing is important. But I tell them two things. Remember that your child is 50% your co-parent. Okay. By the way, I try not to use the word X. Okay. It's a negative term. You're my ex. Let's talk about what your ex is what you're no longer. You're no longer my spouse. Okay. Now, you are and will always be the child's other parent. Okay. So you refer to that parent as your mother, your father, or when you're talking to your friends. When I was going through my divorce, I would describe my kid's mother as Daniel and Jeffrey's mom. Okay. Or I'd use her name if they knew her name, as opposed to another, my ex. Now I fell into that from time to time, and I trained myself out of it. It's only normal. But, all of these failures are also learning experiences, right? We learn by our failures. So welcome the failure, just don't repeat the failure. So I think through the eyes of a child, half of that child is the other parent. And when you run that parent down, you're telling that child that the part of them's not okay. Okay. And when parents split up and their lives are thrown into chaos and the child's life is thrown into chaos, the children need more than ever the stability, predictability, and consistency that comes with two safe relationships with their parents. And when you run your child's other parent down, you make it hard for them to feel safe in their relationship with that parent when they're with you. Okay. Which also means that if they've got a problem with that parent that they want to process with you, they're afraid to bring that up to you because you'll use that as an opportunity to drive a truck over that parent instead of focusing on helping the child solve their problem. Okay. That's one thing I tell them. The other, and I practice that with them, and I point that out to them whenever I have the opportunity, that here's an opportunity where that line of thinking may have helped you. Let's rehearse it. Let's see what you'll do next time. The other thing is I remind them that the goal of being a co-parent is to love your child more than you dislike or distrust their other parent. Okay. Love is limitless. The more you love, the more abundant love is. You'll love your child more than you distrust or dislike. And remember that love feels good and distrust and dislike feels bad. So and I tell the parents, you need all the good you can possibly get right now. So loving Johnny more than you dislike his mother is good for both of you. It'll make you feel better about your life too. I also help them to understand that what we really want in a co-parenting relationship is a business-like relationship. Okay. It doesn't have to be cordial. It doesn't have to be warm. It needs to be business-like. It needs to be respectful in terms of language, how you interact with the person, and just decent, but it doesn't have to be warm and mushy. Okay. And I remind parents too that this is an individual in most cases. We all have cases where the parents never knew each other. It was a Saturday night. It was 1 a.m. These two people went home from the bar together. They'd had a few. They do what adults do. And the next morning, there's a pregnancy. Okay. And these people never knew each other and never had a basis to operate. That's a different kind of situation. But I remind people that at one point, you loved this human being. You planned a life with them. You did things together, and you did what it took to make a child. Remember that was there once, and that you're now seeing that person in this kind of stereotypically, pervasively negative way can't be realistic unless there's something wrong with you, unless your ability to love is based on something that's broken. And I don't think that's true. Okay. So those are some of the ways I approach that.